Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you the new science fiction stories for you, and new adventure, new world.
You ever sit in a classroom and feel like someone's watching you? Not in a creepy way. More like the way a cat watches a mouse hole. Patient. Still. Like they already know exactly how this ends. That was Alara Voss. She sat 3 rows back, never raised her hand, ate the same bland nutrient bar every lunch, and had eyes that didn't quite blink enough. The Xylans thought she was defective. The Verathai thought she was harmless. Me? I just thought she was weird. I was wrong about all of it. By the time I figured out what she really was, 3 species were already dead, and the galaxy was about to learn the most terrifying lesson it ever had. Never mistake silence for weakness. The station smelled like recycled air and desperation. That was the first thing I noticed every morning when I stepped into the Galactic Exchange Program's main habitat ring. 372 students from 14 different species, all crammed into a rotating cylinder of metal and glass, all trying to pretend they understood each other. My name is Kalen Veth Marat. I'm a Verathai record keeper, 3rd generation, which in human terms means I take notes for a living and try to stay out of trouble. The exchange program was supposed to be my big break, a chance to document firsthand how the newest member species adapted to galactic society. The humans had only been on the scene for 12 standard cycles, barely a blink in cosmic terms. The consensus among the older species was pretty simple. Humans were interesting, but ultimately unremarkable. Soft bodies. No natural armor. No psychic abilities. No bioluminescence. No venom. No claws worth mentioning. They couldn't survive hard vacuum, couldn't tolerate extreme radiation, needed a ridiculously narrow temperature range just to keep their internal fluids from freezing or boiling. Their homeworld was a death trap by galactic standards. Too much gravity, too much oxygen, too many pathogens, and a star that spat out lethal radiation like it was personal. And yet here they were, 12 humans in the program. 11 of them were exactly what everyone expected. Loud, messy, over-emotional, constantly touching things they shouldn't, asking questions that made senior diplomats wince. They laughed too loud, argued over meaningless things, and seemed incapable of sitting still for more than a few minutes at a time. But the 12th one? The 12th one was different. Her name was Alara Voss. At least, that's what the roster said. She was small for a human female, compact, almost bird-like in her movements when she bothered to move at all. Pale skin, dark hair cut short, and practical, eyes the color of old iron. She never spoke in class, never asked questions, never volunteered answers. The instructors assumed she was slow, or maybe traumatized, or simply the human equivalent of a defective unit. The Xylan exchange students, feathery, high-strung, constantly chattering, called her the silent ghost in their own language. The massive Krogan delegates just ignored her completely. The Verathai, my own people, classified her as minimal threat, possibly substandard intelligence. I should have known better. Verathai record keepers are supposed to be detail-oriented. But I got comfortable. I got lazy. I assumed the galaxy had already figured humans out. The first hint that something was wrong came during the survival simulation. Every standard rotation, the program ran a mandatory wilderness exercise in the station's biodome sector, a controlled environment designed to test how different species handled stress, resource scarcity, and unexpected threats. The simulation rotated through different biomes each time. This rotation, it was a temperate forest similar to what you'd find on a dozen different garden worlds. Nothing too dangerous. The instructors dialed the threat level down to a 3 out of 10. Just enough to make students think, not enough to actually harm anyone. The exercise started at dawn, station time. 80 students enter the dome. We were split into random teams of 5, each team dumped in a different section of the simulated wilderness with minimal supplies, and told to find our way to a central extraction point within 48 hours. I got assigned to Team 17. Me. 2 Corvinites, scaly, lizard-like beings with excellent heat-sensing vision. A single Xylan named KTK, who immediately started hyperventilating because the simulation included insects. And Alara Voss. She stood at the edge of our landing zone, not saying a word, just looking. Her eyes moved slowly across the tree line, the undergrowth, the path ahead. Her hands hung loose at her sides. Her breathing was so shallow, I almost couldn't see her chest move. The Corvinites took charge immediately. That was their way, decisive, aggressive, always assuming they knew best. They started barking orders about forming a defensive perimeter, rationing the water packs, moving in a tight formation. The Xylan just crouched in a ball and whimpered about bugs. I pulled out my data slate and started taking notes. That was my job. Observe. Record. Stay out of the way. Alara didn't join the discussion. She didn't argue with the Corvinites' plan. She didn't even acknowledge that anyone else existed. She just picked up a small rock from the ground, weighed it in her palm for a moment, and then slipped it into her pocket. I thought that was odd, so I made a note of it. Human, the larger Corvinite said. His name was Thrax. Can you hear me? We need you to take rear guard. Can you handle that? Alara looked at him. Just looked. No verbal acknowledgement. Her face was completely blank. Thrax huffed, his scales rippling in irritation. Defective. Just like the report said. We started moving. The first few hours were uneventful. The simulated forest was well designed. Moss on the north sides of trees, a gentle stream that actually flowed downhill, birdsong that followed a realistic pattern. The Corvinites led us along what they thought was the quickest route to the extraction point, based on their heat sensing and their understanding of the map we'd been given. It was the wrong route. I didn't notice at first. Neither did the Corvinites. But Alara did. I caught her glancing at the map once. Just once, a brief flicker of those iron-colored eyes, and then she started walking slightly off the main path. Not enough to be obvious. Just a few meters to the left or right. Taking shortcuts. Avoiding obstacles. Choosing ground that was firmer, quieter, less likely to slow us down. She never said a word. She just moved. And somehow, without any of us realizing it, she started leading the group. Thrax thought he was still in charge. He kept pointing and gesturing, and every time Alara was already a step ahead, already angling toward the better route. She never contradicted him, never challenged his authority. She just made his decisions irrelevant. I was the only one who noticed, and even I didn't fully understand what I was seeing. Then, the simulation escalated. The instructors, watching from the control room, decided we were having too easy a time. They introduced a predator, a pack of simulated carnivores, about the size of a large Terran wolf, designed to harass students and force them to problem solve under pressure. The creatures weren't actually dangerous. Their teeth and claws were blunted, and they'd disengage if a student was genuinely in distress. But they looked real, they sounded real, and they triggered every fear response in every species present. The Corvinites panicked first. For all their bravado, they were hunters, not fighters. Their instinct was to flee from anything larger than themselves. They broke formation almost immediately, scrambling up the nearest trees and hissing in terror. KTK the Xylan fainted dead away, just collapsed in a heap of feathers and pathetic whimpers. I froze. I'll admit it. I'm a record keeper, not a soldier. My claws are for gripping data slates, not fighting. I stood there like an idiot while the pack circled closer, their simulated growls vibrating through the ground. And Alara? Alara moved. Not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate. She stepped between me and the nearest predator, her body angled slightly sideways, her hands still loose at her sides. Her eyes tracked the pack leader's movements with an intensity that made my blood run cold. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have armor. She was a soft, fragile human female, barely 120 standard units in mass, facing down half a dozen creatures that outweighed her individually. But she wasn't afraid. I'd seen courage before. Verathai soldiers have it. Krogan berserkers have it. But this wasn't courage. Courage is pushing through fear. Alara simply didn't seem to experience fear at all. Her heart rate, I could see it on my Slate's bio scanner, stayed steady at 62 beats per minute. The same as when she'd been sitting in class. The same as when she'd been eating her nutrient bar. The pack leader lunged. Alara didn't flinch. She stepped inside the creature's reach, impossibly close enough to feel its breath, and her hand came up. Not a punch, not a strike, just a precise, economical movement that ended with two of her fingers pressed against the predator's throat. The creature froze. Its eyes went wide. Then it collapsed, twitching, its simulated nervous system reporting catastrophic failure. The other predators backed away immediately. They didn't run. They retreated, which is different. They watched Alara with the same expression I was probably wearing. Pure, undisguised confusion. She'd killed the pack leader. Not with strength. Not with a weapon. With knowledge. She'd known exactly where to press. Exactly how hard. Exactly what would happen to the creature's nerve clusters when she did. It had taken less than half a second. The remaining predators slunk back into the forest. Alara straightened up, wiped her fingers on her pants, and looked at me. "You're Slate," she said. It was the first time I'd heard her voice. Low, flat, almost musical in a strange way. Like a lullaby sung by someone who'd never actually been comforted by one. "What?" I managed. "You're Slate. Record this." She pointed at the twitching predator. Primary nerve cluster located at the intersection of the fourth and fifth cervical vertebrae. Compression of the cluster induces immediate paralysis in all mammalian and semi-mammalian species. Useful information. Then, she turned and walked toward the extraction point, stepping over KTK's unconscious body like it was a fallen log. I stood there for a long moment, my claws trembling on my slate. Then I started recording. The incident in the biodome should have been a warning. The instructors should have reviewed the footage, analyzed their techniques, asked questions. They didn't. They were too busy covering their own exoskeletons. A student had technically killed a simulated creature, which was against the rules, but they didn't want to admit that one of their harmless humans had done it so efficiently. So they buried the report, marked it as a system glitch, gave everyone on Team 17 a passing grade, and moved on. But I didn't move on. I started watching Alara Voss. Not in a creepy way. Well, maybe a little creepy, but I had a record keeper's instincts, and those instincts were screaming that I'd missed something important. So I watched her in class, in the dining hall, during free periods. I watched the way she moved through crowds, always taking the path of least resistance, always choosing the route that gave her the most visibility and the most exits. I watched the way she ate, small bites, frequent sips of water, never letting her attention wander. I watched the way she slept, curled in a corner of her dormitory, facing the door, one hand always free. She never spoke to anyone unless spoken to first. And even then, her answers were brief, economical. She gave exactly the information requested and nothing more. The other humans thought she was strange. I overheard them talking about her once, during a meal break. "She's like a robot," said a human male named Chun. Like someone programmed her to look human, but forgot to install the personality. "Maybe she's just shy," offered a female named Priya. "Some people are quiet." "For 6 months? She hasn't said 10 words since we got here." "That's not shy. That's something else." They laughed it off, the way humans do when they're uncomfortable. But I noticed that none of them sat near Alara. None of them invited her to their study groups or their recreational activities. She ate alone, studied alone, existed in a bubble of silence that no one wanted to breach. Except me. I started sitting near her in the dining hall. Not next to her. That would have been too obvious. Just at the same table, a few seats away, close enough to observe without intruding. She never acknowledged me, never looked up from her nutrient bar, but she also never moved away, which I took as a good sign. 3 weeks after the biodome incident, the real crisis began. The Krogan Dominion had been expanding into contested space for years, pushing against the borders of 3 different species territories. The exchange program was supposed to be a gesture of goodwill, a neutral ground where diplomacy could flourish. But the Krogan weren't interested in diplomacy. They were interested in dominance. Their delegation arrived without warning. 15 full-grown Krogan warriors, each one twice the size of a human, their thick hides studded with ceremonial armor, their forearms bristling with weapons. They claimed they were there for cultural exchange. Everyone with half a brain knew they were there for intimidation. The program director, an ancient Verathai elder named Sorvith, tried to maintain order. He scheduled meetings, arranged tours, did everything he could to keep the Krogan away from the smaller, more vulnerable species in the program. But the Krogan didn't want tours. They wanted to prove a point. The human delegation became their favorite target. It started small. A Krogan warrior would bump into a human student in the corridor, hard enough to knock them down. A human's personal belongings would go missing from their dormitory, only to be found crushed in a trash compactor. A human female reported being followed to her quarters by a group of Krogan who made gestures that needed no translation. The instructors did nothing. The Krogan were too powerful, too politically connected. Complaints were filed and then buried. Apologies were offered and then withdrawn. The message was clear. Humans were at the bottom of the galactic hierarchy, and the Krogan were happy to remind them of that fact. The human students tried to fight back at first. Chun confronted a Krogan in the dining hall, got backhanded across the room for his trouble, and spent 3 days in the medical bay with a fractured skull. Priya organized a petition, but no one signed it. The other species were too afraid of Krogan retaliation. And Alara? Alara watched. Just watched from her corner of the dining hall, her iron-colored eyes tracking every interaction, every slight, every dropped threat. She didn't get angry. She didn't get scared. She just observed. The way you'd observe a puzzle you were trying to solve. I should have realized what she was doing. But I was too busy being terrified myself. The breaking point came on a rotation day called Vethkel, a minor Verathai holiday celebrating the end of the harvest season. The program organized a small gathering in the main atrium, with music and food from various species' homeworlds. It was supposed to be a moment of peace, a chance to remember that we were all sentient beings sharing the same cold void of space. The Krogan turned it into a massacre. It started when their leader, a massive brute named Grommash, demanded that the human students perform some kind of traditional dance for his entertainment. The humans refused. Grommash laughed and said it wasn't a request. Chun stepped forward. Brave, stupid Chun, his skull barely healed, his hands shaking. We're not dancing for you. This isn't your station. You don't give orders here. Grommash stopped laughing. For a moment, the atrium was completely silent. Then Grommash moved, faster than something that size should be able to move, and his lower left arm swept out, catching Chun across the chest with enough force to lift him off his feet. Chun crashed into a table, shattered it, and didn't get up. The Krogan warriors cheered. The other species in the atrium fled in panic. I pressed myself against a wall, my data slate forgotten, my mind blank with fear. Grommash looked around the room, his tiny eyes gleaming. Any other humans want to perform for us? The remaining human students, maybe 8 of them, huddled together, faces pale, hands raised in surrender. They were terrified. They had every right to be terrified. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and completely alone. And then Alara stepped forward. She walked out of the crowd like she was walking to class. No hosetashchen, no drama, just one foot in front of the other, heading straight for Grommash, who towered over her like a mountain over a sapling. Grommash's lip curled. What's this? A female? Are you going to dance for me, little one? Alara stopped about 3 meters from him. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was blank. Her iron-colored eyes never left his. No, she said. I'm going to give you one chance to leave. The Krogan warriors laughed. Grommash laughed loudest of all, his forearms spreading wide in mockery. One chance? One chance from a creature I could crush with one hand? You humans are even more foolish than I. Alara moved. I'd seen her move before in the biodome. That had been fast. This was something else entirely. This was beyond fast. It was anticipatory. She was moving before Grommash finished his sentence, closing the 3-meter gap in a heartbeat. Her hand already extended, her fingers already positioned. She hit him in the throat. Not a punch, not a slap. A precise, surgical strike, 2 fingers extended, targeting a specific cluster of nerve that I later learned existed in almost all bipedal species. The sound it made was soft, almost gentle, like a cork being pulled from a bottle. Gromash's eyes went wide. His hands flew to his throat, but it was already too late. His airway had collapsed. His vocal cords were spasming. He staggered backward, making a wheezing, horrible sound, his legs buckling beneath his massive weight. 2 of his warriors rushed forward to protect him. Alara didn't back away. She met the first one head-on, ducking under his swinging arms, driving her elbow into his knee joint, which bent backward with a sickening crack. Then, pivoting to face the second warrior, who was already swinging a massive fist at her skull. She caught his wrist. A human catching a Krogan's wrist? It should have been impossible. The Krogan was 5 times her mass. But she didn't try to stop his momentum. She redirected it, pulling him off balance, using his own strength to drive him face first into the floor. His skull cracked against the metal. He didn't move again. The remaining Krogan warriors froze. They had weapons, ceremonial blades, stun batons, kinetic projectors. But they didn't use them, because Alara was looking at them, and something in her expression made even those battle-hardened killers hesitate. She was smiling. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd spent her entire life being underestimated, being dismissed, being labeled as quiet and harmless and forgettable. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized her prey had no idea what she really was. "I'm going to say this once," Alara said, her voice still low and calm, as if she hadn't just dropped 2 Krogan warriors in under 3 seconds. "The human species has been hunting apex predators since before we developed language. We've killed everything that ever tried to eat us. We've turned our own planet's deadliest creatures into pets, into symbols, into meals. You think your size impresses us? Your strength? Your armor?" She took a step closer to the nearest Krogan warrior, who actually flinched. "We've been killing things bigger and stronger than you for 100,000 years. It's what we're built for. It's what we're good at. And the only reason we haven't wiped you out already is because we're trying to be civilized." She let that hang in the air for a moment. "So here's your second chance. Pick up your leader. Get back on your ship. And if I ever see a Krogan in human space again, I won't bother with negotiations." The Krogan warriors looked at each other. One of them, the youngest probably, made a move toward his weapon. Alara's hand twitched just slightly, and he stopped immediately. They picked up Gromash's wheezing body and carried him out of the atrium. They didn't look back. The silence after they left was deafening. The aftermath was chaos. The Krogan Dominion filed formal complaints, demanded Alara be extradited for unprovoked assault on diplomatic personnel, and threatened to withdraw from every treaty they'd ever signed. The program director, Sorvith, spent 3 straight rotation cycles in emergency meetings, trying to prevent an interspecies war. But something strange happened. The other species in the program, the Xylans, the Corvinites, even the Verathai, started paying attention to Alara. Not to her violence, to what she represented. Because while the Krogan were screaming for justice, the human students were quietly going about their business, and for the first time, the other species noticed something about them. Something they'd missed before. Humans didn't stop. That was the thing. The Krogan attack had terrified everyone. The Xylans were still having panic attacks. The Corvinites had locked themselves in their quarters. Even my own Verathai people, usually so composed, were jittery and paranoid. But the humans? They went to class. They ate their meals. They laughed at their stupid jokes. Chan was out of the medical bay within a day, his skull somehow already healing, a rate of recovery that made no biological sense. Priya was back to organizing study groups. The other human students were helping clean up the damaged atrium, not because anyone asked them to, but because they just did. They were resilient. Not the way a rock is resilient, unmoving, unfeeling. The way a forest fire is resilient. They got knocked down, and they got back up. They got hurt, and they kept going. They lost people, and they mourned, and then they fought harder. Alara wasn't the most dangerous thing about humanity. She was just the most obvious. I started asking questions. Quietly, carefully, using my record keeper credentials to access files I probably shouldn't have seen. And what I found changed everything I thought I knew about humans. Their homeworld wasn't just dangerous, it was a crucible. Massive predators that had evolved specifically to hunt them. Diseases that could kill a human in days, sometimes hours. Natural disasters that wiped out entire civilizations. And through all of it, humans just kept surviving. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. Because they were the most stubborn. They developed a concept called the hunter's trance. A state of hyper-awareness where fear shut off, adrenaline became a tool, and every movement was precise, economical, deadly. Alara wasn't unique. She was trained. Somewhere in humanity's bloody history, someone had figured out how to weaponize that trance, how to teach it, how to pass it down through generations. The Krogan hadn't attacked a weak species. They'd attacked a species of apex predators wearing sheep's clothing. 3 weeks after the Atrium incident, the Krogan Dominion tried again. This time, they didn't send diplomats. They sent a warship. It appeared in the station's orbit without warning, its weapons arrays hot, its communication channels demanding Alara's immediate surrender. The station's defense systems were laughable by comparison. A few outdated point defense cannons, nothing that could threaten a warship of that class. Sorvith broadcast an emergency message to the entire station. All students, report to your dormitories immediately. This is not a drill. But Alara didn't go to her dormitory. I found her in the observation deck, staring out at the warship through the reinforced glass. Her arms were crossed. Her face was calm. Behind her, a dozen human students had gathered. Not hiding, not panicking, just waiting. What are you doing? I asked, my voice higher than I wanted it to be. There's a warship out there. They're going to do nothing, Alara said. How can you possibly know that? She turned to look at me, and for the first time, something flickered in those iron-colored eyes. Not fear, not anger, something almost like sadness. Because they're afraid, she said. The Krogan have never lost a fight before. They don't know how to handle it. So they're making noise, hoping we'll back down. But we won't. We? You mean humanity? She shook her head slowly. No, I mean me. Before I could ask what she meant, she walked to the observation deck's emergency airlock, pulled it open, and stepped inside. Wait, I said. What are you? She cycled the airlock. The emergency hatch opened to hard vacuum. Alara stepped out onto the hull of the station, her magnetic boots clicking against the metal, her breath pluming in the nothingness. No espellisuit. No helmet. Just her, the stars, and a warship full of armed Krogan. I watched through the observation window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Alara walked to the edge of the station's outer ring, lifted her arm, and pointed directly at the warship. Then, she made a gesture, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. She drew her thumb across her throat. The warship's weapons went dark. Its engines fired. Within 30 seconds, it was gone, burning hard away from the station, back toward Krogan space. Alara walked back to the airlock, cycled it, and stepped into the observation deck like she'd just returned from a stroll in the garden. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale. But she was smiling that terrible smile again. How did you survive that? I whispered. The vacuum. The cold. You should be dead. She shrugged. Probably. But humans have a trick. When we're dying, our bodies make choices. Shut down non-essential systems. Preserve oxygen for the brain. Keep the heart beating even when everything else fails. It's not comfortable, but it's possible. She looked past me at the human students who had gathered to watch. They weren't surprised. They weren't horrified. They were nodding, like this was exactly what they'd expected. We've been underestimated before, Alara said quietly. Every species we've ever met thought they had us figured out. Thought we were weak. Thought we were primitive. Thought we'd be easy prey. She looked back at the stars, where the Krogan warship had vanished. None of them survived. The station was quiet for a long time after that. The Krogan Dominion officially withdrew from the exchange program, and unofficially, they redrew their borders to stay as far from human space as possible. The other species watched and learned and started treating humans very, very differently. I finished my record-keeping assignment, filed my final report, and watched Alara Voss walk out of the station's docking bay one last time. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back. She just walked the way she always did, with that silent, predatory grace that I'd learned to recognize. And as I watch her go, I realized something that I've since written into the official record, the one that will outlast me and everyone I've ever known. The galaxy spend a lot of time looking for threats. We scan the skies for asteroid impacts, for gamma-ray bursts, for alien invasions. We build weapons and shields and treaties, all designed to protect us from the things we can see coming. But we never look at the quiet ones. The ones who sit in the back of the class, who never raise their hands, who eat their nutrient bars in silence, and watch the world with eyes that don't quite blink enough. We assume they're harmless. We assume they're weak. We assume we have nothing to fear. We're wrong. Because every once in a while, just often enough to keep us honest, one of those quiet ones stands up, and the whole galaxy remembers that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the loudest predator or the biggest warship. It's the silent girl in the back of the class who's been watching you all along. And she already knows exactly how this ends.